I've got 30 minutes to go over this, so what I'm going to do is try to do this topically. I want to start out by thanking Steve for another great seminar. I've just come to love coming to these things, and Bernice does such a great job organizing things. The food's always great. Love seeing the same faces and many times some of the great speakers again and again. And I just learn a lot by coming to these things. Many of you are lawyers, or you're in law enforcement, judges, so it would be very boring for me to read to you these different bills, and it's really unnecessary. And many of you are already familiar with how they apply in practice. So what I'd like to do is give this to you in a little different format than you might normally find it, which is going at it, as I say, by topics. So for example, what I'm going to do is try to leave you with an impression of what it is that's actually going on in Columbia in a topical way. And then you can, on these bills, take a look and decide, which ones you would like to look into in more detail. I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the things I notice that seems to be the recurring issues every year when they meet up down in Columbia. We have a disagreement, I believe, in the country and in the courts on the status of the Second Amendment, whether it is on an equal par with other amendments or whether it's somehow a little different. In some of the cases, and I know you'll hear about this later from more qualified speakers on this subject, that when it comes to review of legislation, you always have the Second Amendment in the background, and whatever restrictions government puts on our Second Amendment liberties have to pass the Second Amendment test. Since the Heller decision in McDonald, there's been, I believe in the federal courts, you might say, a sort of a cabining off of some of the effect of those decisions through the level of scrutiny that's been applied in reviewing legislation. So that's something that we think about as we start looking at these, because they can legislate in Columbia, but in the end it also has to it has to pass constitutional standards. One of the things you notice is, I'm going to call it, is news cycle legislative initiatives. We'll see this in just a minute. Every year there are certain events that happen, and just knee-jerk reaction, you start to see bills that are focused on that. Not necessarily long-range, thought-out bills, just bills that's like, we need to fix that. And so you start getting that kind of legislation, and we have some examples about like that. A lot of these ideas are theoretical, and in many cases, if you start looking at what's the empirical basis for thinking this might solve the problem, we frequently find that there are bills that are really solutions in search of a problem. They don't really fit the problem that led to them through the news and concerns being addressed legislatively. Statistics. Both sides will wear you out with statistics. You can find so many problems, and you could really, basically someone could write a book on this. You have very narrow samples. Domestic violence is a good example. You'll find huge claims made based on really very small changes, and if you look at absolute numbers, but statistically, it can look to be very dramatic. Newspapers picked this up. I saw an article in the Greenville News last year. They had actually drawn conclusions about the number of people that are allowed to purchase guns through the default proceed program, how many of them actually committed crimes. And they were using national statistics at one point and our state statistics in another. You call the paper, you talk to them, it's like, oh, well, it's a problem, so it's in the news. So, there's not a lot of not a lot of integrity, I don't think, in the presentation of statistics. And then we have to consider special interest influence. We've had hearings in this state over the summer, largely political theater, in my opinion. I went to 2 of them. I don't think a lot was accomplished there. You see the same folks show up on both sides. You see money from outside the state, clearly. Public health has basically been hijacked as kind of an area to talk about gun violence, and just by the terms people use, you can already start to see where they're coming from on these issues. So all those things are in the background, and when we look at these bills, and I'm going to be moving through these pretty quickly, just bear in mind this is kind of how things seem to work down there. The first example Of course, in our state, Dylan Roof still continues to be a big concern of how to fix that problem.
Bureau allowed the man charged with the Charleston church massacre to buy the gun used to murder 9 people. FBI agents met with the victims' families today to explain what happened, and we asked Chris Van Cleve to explain it to us.
FBI Director James Comey called the mistake heartbreaking and said, "We are all sick that this has happened. We wish we could turn back time." On April 11th, Dylan Roof went into this South Carolina gun store to purchase a Glock handgun. The transaction triggered an automatic federal background check. An FBI examiner pulled Roof's police rap sheet and saw an earlier arrest for drug possession. But she did not see this incident report where Roof admitted having the drugs. That confession should have disqualified him from buying a weapon. The examiner never got the report because she couldn't track down the proper police department, so she marked Roof's case as pending and moved on to other cases. Under the law, if a background check remains unresolved after 3 days, the sale can proceed, and that's exactly what happened. Roof completed his purchase on April 16th. Is the system of background checking the FBI uses flawed?
I don't think so. No.
Daniel Webster is director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research.
It's important to recognize that while the system didn't work in this case and with tragic results, on an average day in the United States, over 500 times, someone is identified and denied.
Okay, so I'm not going to, for an extra time, I'm not going to go down that road too far. But the point is, if you notice, and many of you may be aware, the problem was with the FBI background check. South Carolina is one of the states that relies on the NICS program and to advise, and there was a misunderstanding about West Columbia, Richland County, Lexington. It's a little odd little corner of Columbia, and then there was a mistake in the sharing of information. So some 3 months later, Dylan Roof commits this horrible crime. And so then we began to have people, want to, let's try to fix this. But as I said earlier, a lot of times we have solutions that really are in search of a problem. It's really discouraging that none of the bills and legislation deal with improving sharing of information and being sure that good information is getting in the system. That was the problem. And yet, all we get back, are just, well, let's just have more people do background checks. Let's, in this case of this particular bill, unless your spouse, domestic partner, children, stepchildren, if you want to give a firearm to your grandson, deer rifle, you got to go. And if you're in a rural area, you might have a drive. I'm certain you're going to have to go get a background check done to be able to do these transfers. I'm not going to advocate one way or another on these bills. I don't think that's my place. I'm trying to help you see what we have out there in terms of legislation. But just ask yourself as you look at these bills, are we really getting bills that are designed to fix the problem? Dylan Roof, I think it was three months before he committed the crime. Now here's a 28-day background check delay. I mean, it's almost like the actual facts that gave rise to the case that the people that are pushing these aren't familiar with the kind of problems we're having. In my opinion, it's an information sharing problem when it comes to background checks. If you believe it works at all, you must want the best information in the system. So anyway, you're going to see a lot of those bills being kicked around. Whether they succeed or not, I'm not sure. I did speak to some senators before this seminar this week about the change in the minority report procedure. This could mean that we get more bills passed, but I'm not sure because this is first year and I'm not an expert on this, but the way it was explained to me, it used to be that you could attach a minority report and that could, absent some sort of special order, it made it very hard for that bill to pass. Now I'm told that rule has changed. Every senator gets, I think in like jury strikes, like 5 bills you can pretty much, obstruct. But then it goes on. So that change, we'll have to see what happens. It may have some effect on legislation being passed this year, might make it more possible. On the background checks, the real questions, the policy issues, deterrence of future acquisition of firearms. I mean, are we really, are these bills really going to help us on that? Is it efficient? Is it working? Where are criminals really getting their guns anyway? Interviews and several instances of inmates show that a large majority of them get them through the black market and on the street, and that's a problem. So, those are things that should be considered as these bills are looked at, and not just the emotional issues. I thought this was an interesting story. I'm going to take a minute to play this if you don't mind. This is a fellow who's interviewed. He was in a maximum security prison in Pennsylvania for various gun crimes, including murder. And this is a little short story, which might add a little background to what we're talking about.
I started smoking weed at 9 years old, and I was hanging around people that I was smoking weed with, and I thought they was cool, and I seen the things that they was doing. They had a lot of money and stuff like that. I wanted a lot of money and stuff like that too. So one day, I remember it was my birthday. My friend, he came around and he had a gun, and he was going to sell me a gun for my birthday. He was like, "Yeah, I know it's your birthday. I got this for you. I'm going to give it to you for a low price because it's your birthday." I'm like, "For real? Like a gun?" Like, I was real young. All the birthday money I had, I bought that gun. Well, that gun was a 32. It was a 32 caliber. I used to go into the alleyway and I used to shoot it. It used to make me feel like I don't have anything to worry about anymore. Like, I know if I don't have any money, I could go take somebody's money. And ain't nobody gonna tell me I can't have it or anything like that. And it ain't none of that now that I got the gun. Like, I used to do things like I try to take money without a gun. But, sometimes you might have to fight and think. When you got a gun, people don't want to fight for their money. They don't want no problems. You see what I'm saying? So it just made me feel like powerful. So that's all.
I won't play it all for the interest of time. That's just a real sad story. And he also says later in the interview that he felt he needed a gun for protection because of the area he lived in. And as you look at these bills and you think about what we should be doing, inner cities and bad neighborhoods and gangs are a huge problem. And if the gang problems could be resolved and get to some of these people, these young people, before they make these mistakes, that would be huge in taking care of a lot of the problems that we're talking about today. Another news cycle story is the Jacob Hall incident, which many of you are familiar with. This is more in the part of the state that I live in. This is and this is going to lead to the campus carry bills, which I'm going to go through here in just a minute. And you can decide for yourself if you think that the campus carry bills we're talking about might help or might not. A lot of policy decision to be made on that. But of course, with the school children, and they can't protect themselves. We got compulsory education laws. As a society, we're responsible for their safety. They don't have a choice. They have to be at school. So this is the Townsville incident.
A mother from Townville, South Carolina was at work yesterday when she heard the news of a shooting at the elementary school. She later learned that her 14-year-old son is accused of killing her husband and wounding 2 students and a teacher. Manuel Bojorquez is there.
The teenage shooter opened fire near the playground just as students at Townville Elementary walked out of the door for afternoon recess. 2 6-year-olds and a teacher were hit by the bullets.
Yesterday, our community, we experienced a very devastating and life-changing event. We're going to feel this for a real long time.
Townville Fire Chief Billy McAdams, whose son attends the school, was first on the scene. Another firefighter, Jamie Brock, found the teen who had a handgun at the back of the school and pinned him down. First grader Jacob Hall was the most critically injured.
He died through massive loss of blood. Very small kid, he probably weighed 80 pounds. And the bullet severed a femoral artery, and he bled out, and there was no way they could save him. So then what you find in the legislature is, they want to help us with this. And of course, we all don't want to see those things happen, so what do? Well, we've got several Jacob Hall School Protection Act bills. This is one of them, 3052. This would allow, and actually, if you look at the statute on school carry, I don't really see a bar to school officials allowing carry already. But in any event, some of these bills say they're going to clarify that can happen. This particular bill would allow the public schools to authorize employees to hold, a permit, and it says live shooters, which I think is maybe a typo. I think they must have meant active shooter. But in any event, this is legislation that would not apply to private schools, which is kind of interesting to me because when you think about it, private schools aren't exempt from fire codes and other things. So, if this is a problem for children, and my children went through a private religious school, so I'm kind of interested in this topic. They're all through it now, but I'm not sure the rationale behind exempting them, but maybe they're First Amendment issues and such. Here's another bill. This is 3330. This says school officials will be able to approve that. I looked it up. School officials are appointed. So this would not mean teachers, I don't think. This would mean principals. And again, this one only applies to elementary schools and secondary schools. Senate Bill 85, that's a complicated bill. I printed these complicated bills out in your material. By the way, my material's in the manila folder. So, and I apologize, I should have told you that. But this bill has several parts. I broke them up and put them under different topics for you because if you just read it, it just has all these different things in it and they don't seem to go together. So that's a bill that is on. And then this bill would create what I call, and all these little quotes are my quotes. I put these on here to help you just kind of get in your head at a quick look. What is this thing about? This would create a special permit for school personnel, and this would be regulated through SLED. It would be a special permit, and there would be a whole regulated structure, on that. So, do you have to ask yourself as a policy matter, do you want this to be a program SLED runs? Do you want it to be a program that the local school district runs? In Ohio, they allow it to be done by school district. They got something like 40 school districts in Ohio now where they have authorized school teacher carry under a training program that's, very carefully worked out. And so it's kind of up to the school district. So, these are policy decisions, and I'm not weighing in on it. I'm just pointing out to you those are things to be considered. Then you get into post-secondary school carry. What about college campuses? Well, we got a couple of bills that would do that. We've got this bill, 3248, and then we have the 3262. And in both instances, these are making changes to the law that would allow permit holders access to or to carry their firearms on college campuses. Issues here to be considered, resources. One of the reasons that we these days have, I'm a commissioner of a local fire district. One of the things that happened over the last several decades is fire personnel you see show up a lot more on accident scenes. Why is that? Well, because local government started thinking, we're paying these guys. A lot of them are EMS trained. All of ours are in our fire district. So why shouldn't we use them? And in fact, as it turns out, they frequently beat EMS to the scene, and frequently you need to have extraction. So there are reasons for that. But the point of it is, resources. You do have school personnel that are already there. I mean, we have elementary schools where the resource officer has to go between 4 different schools. When his car's in the school lot, he's there. When it's not, it's conspicuously absent. So if we're going to have, are we going to have more funds to provide, for more resource officers? Or, and I think the tendency to want to use some school personnel is, well, we've already got them there. They know the school. They know the layout of it. They may even know situations that might be things they need to worry about. Maybe that makes sense. So, that's the consideration. And then, as I said earlier, where do you want the oversight to be? Then you got the issue of empowerment of first responders. I'm going to get to that in just a minute on what I call privileged carry, and that is who is able to carry, because we've got a lot of bills on that. There are very special exceptions for certain people based on their jobs. I personally am aware of 2 bills, one by Senator Burns, who's my representative, that would authorize firefighters and first responders to carry. And as you noticed from the Townsville incident, or if you didn't quite pick up on this, the guy that actually subdued the shooter was a volunteer fireman who was first on the scene. But currently, fire personnel and first responders aren't authorized to carry. So these bills, as we'll get to in a minute, would give them some education that is similar to what law enforcement gets and give them some carry privileges. Okay, so let's move on into, I'm going to briefly, this is big. It is the holy grail of all Second Amendment advocates, constitutional carry. We've got a bill here, it's 3,700, it was just filed a couple of weeks ago. Boy, you got to stay on top of this stuff. This is a very lengthy bill. My friend Robert Murding, who's going to be a speaker later, he has a nice summary of this on his website. But essentially, if you work through it, what it does is it takes our, in South Carolina we have a statute that basically prohibits the carry of handguns. And then there's just an enormous list of exceptions. So there are a couple of ways you might deal with that. You could just obliterate it, or you could add more exceptions. This bill goes in the approach of adding more exceptions. So when it gets done with exceptions and the various different necessary corollary changes in other statutes, essentially it would allow open carry because there's no prohibition against it once these exceptions go into place, and it would allow what's known as permitless carry. There's permitless carry in a number of states. More and more states are doing this. It's happened in Missouri. It's been the law forever in Vermont. These states have not had any real problem with that. There are a lot of issues go back and forth on that as to, you know, if that's a good idea or not, but there are many states that seem to be able to pull that off, and they don't have a lot of stories in the news where people have gotten into trouble. I would show you this, but I don't think we have time. This is some firefighters who were ambushed back December Eve a couple years ago. If you Google firefighters and ambush, you'll find more news stories than you think. What are the merits of allowing these people to protect themselves? If there's an incident with an active shooter, they may be the ones on the scene that's trying to pull someone to safety. Should we, based on that, give them some means of protecting themselves? These are things that have to be thought through. Now, there's some people in Columbia that are thinking it through, and they're saying, you know what? We're going to fix that. So here's House Bill 3566. Again, these are my little descriptions. So if you go out and start talking about first responder school ground carry, people are not going to know what you're talking about, because this is just Harmon trying to simplify. But if you would notice, and these are in your materials, of course, we have several bills on this. It's complicated because who does it extend to? Is it going to be EMS? Is it going to be firefighters? Is it going to be both? What are the circumstances? Would it be on duty, off duty? You can make cases for this. We were having a discussion about this last night at dinner. If you show up at a service station, you get out of your truck, you're pumping gas, you have a badge on. In the fire service, the badge that's worn is not so easy for laymen necessarily to know it's not law enforcement. And for people that want to ambush law enforcement, or that's I don't know. Obviously, you have to decide what but these are issues of privileged carry that are down in the legislature being considered. Now, here's one. I call it judicial branch carry. All these judges and different folks here in this list, including clerks of court that got thrown in. This is like many of these people. I think the statute actually would give active judges, they can carry, but this would also extend it so that they can carry even if they're retired, and we have two of those. I can't tell you those things wouldn't. I mean, it's very possible someone might pass these little exceptions, but the news cycle stories I think are the best. Have the best chance of passing because they're emotional, it's on people's mind, and those are the ones. But something like this might kind of pass if they're going to first responders, and they might go, well, we got similar issues with people who are judges. They may have a case where they are, they have a sentence someone disagrees with, and later, there's an issue of retaliation. We've got a bill for victims advocates carry. So Another special exception. You could make a case for lawyers. 15 years ago, I was taking a deposition, and guy throws his glasses at me and comes across the table. I guess I asked a bad question. But, everyone in their job, I guess at some point, can be threatened. So these are decisions to be made on a policy level, but at what point does that entitle you some special carry privilege? And then this bill has to do with mandatory evacuation. Honestly, I'm not quite sure where they're going with that one, but I guess they're thinking of like Katrina-like situations or something like that. Not sure. Okay, so I think we've kind of covered the policy issues on that. I would just leave you this. To what extent would privilege carry be necessary if we had constitutional carry? Really, maybe we wouldn't even need to go into that as deep. Property rights, always back and forth on that. You have the right to your property. That's your domain. You have control over that. I have my Second Amendment rights. If I visit your property, to what extent, how are we going to balance this out? Well, we made a decision a long time ago when it came to certain rights that even though I might own a restaurant, I can't deny someone the right to come eat there based on their race because we have deemed that a public accommodation, and we feel that people, and the decision was made, the property rights are not going to prevail at that point over the countervailing right. The Second Amendment hasn't fared as well. Again, it seems to be sort of a stepchild in this area. You end up with, how do you balance it out? There are people that, for example, large companies where I live up in the upstate, they will ban you from even having the gun in your car. So you've basically disarmed that person for however long they may drive because there's no place for them to put their firearm. What do we do? Well, here's a bill, carry ban liability. This is actually the law in Tennessee, so before you think this couldn't happen, it could happen. I'm not saying South Carolina will happen because there's a lot of things different here. We're one of 5 states that have absolutely no open carry, whereas you go across the line, North Carolina, and you can. So South Carolina is different. But this would impose liability. I will tell you, I don't know exactly how these lawsuits would work, but the point is there would be a statute, and if you did ban carry, you would under this have some sort of premises liability for that. This bill I call drive-by shooting offenses. This looks like it might not be a bad bill. I'll take the liberty to comment on this one. Basically, this just says you can't shoot in a dwelling, structures, enclosures of vehicles. So, if people shoot in an open area like a parking lot or something like that, shouldn't that still be considered, because it's sort of a wanton, reckless act of shooting? And so that probably, does make some sense when you think about it. Another carry ban liability. Okay, and then reciprocity. This one's big. Running out of time. But here's what I'll tell you about this. The NRA has pushed and is pushing the National Concealed Weapons Permit Reciprocity Act. This would enhance permit holders. I won't ask you to identify yourselves, but the people that are here that do have permits, the problem of going from state to state. You may have gotten a Utah permit or some other permit. Now, of course, we have Georgia reciprocity after last year, so that problem solved for people that travel there. But every time South Carolina has made it easier for people to carry in South Carolina, South Carolinians have gotten more rights to carry in other states. That's just the way it's worked. So this bill would basically take us further down that path. You'll find critics of it saying that other states aren't as vigilant in vetting their people as we are. Actually, I don't know that the training people get in to get a permit is that significant, but that's a decision for the General Assembly. Of course, you're going to get this one every year. This is the basically aimed at the AR-15 rifle. Everybody here probably is familiar with the AR-15 rifle. Whether it is the problem that it has been perceived to be is up for debate. So few people killed by rifles. don't think the FBI even tracks that. It's just not a common weapon used, and it's not preferred in street violence. It's a relatively expensive firearm, and handguns are much easier to get your hands on. So the biggest concern there is, I think, does this create a big problem for mass shootings? And not a lot of history of that. You know the recent story as well as I do, so I won't go through that. But I suggest that there's something called a substitution effect. And it's been pretty much shown that if you take away certain means of offense, then people will resort to others. And you know, it's up to you to decide if you think a tactical shotgun would be just as effective as an AR-15 in a close quarter situation. We've got a bizarre bill, this House Bill number 3268, terror watch list ban. This is another one where you just wonder, do they read the news before they start putting the pen to paper? How would you know who's on the terror watch list? I mean, how would you know? So, I don't know. I don't get that one. There may be something more to it, but on a first reading to me, and I look back and I called a friend of mine who keeps up with us, and it's like, that's sort of a government eyes only thing? I don't know. It seems like a bill that came from an uninformed place. You have more penalties for unlawful carrying of handguns. I'm not going to cover that. And okay, I'm going to pretty much call that a wrap. We'll stay on time here. What I will do for you, and I'm sorry I went through that kind of quickly, but I don't want to read you these bills. I put some of the larger ones in your material. Know that there's some federal bills I put in there. For example, there's a federal bill on reciprocity that will basically supersede the need for the states to approve it. And I was talking to Mark Kelly before we came in, our ATF agent who is up on these things, and you know, he commented on that to me. So if that passes, then what we do in South Carolina may not be so important. Another thing is there's a move under hearing protection to approve suppressors. So these state bills that would have mufflers and silencers, you know, as a regulated as a firearm, they could be superseded as well if this federal statute passes. That's in the material. The last thing I'll say is, Steve and I talked. We're going to do this seminar again in Greenville. These bills will continue to get filed. If you would like, and I'll let Steve think about how you want to do this, but I will update and provide the updates between now and the next seminar at a place you can get them online. And so you'll get the benefit everybody gets in Greenville. And I'll let Steve decide where on his site where he wants to put that. You all can look into that. But then that way, as the bills are, and there will be more filed, you'll have access to that information also. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.